Hi everyone, thank you for tuning into my channel. It's been a while since I actually uploaded anything. I've just been busy doing other stuff, whatever. So anyway, I'm here today. So I wanted to talk about today with you guys the Roswell crash of 1947. I'm pretty sure most of you guys know the story, but I wanted to focus particularly on a couple of people of the Roswell crash that happened in New Mexico in 1947. And that's the mortician that worked at the funeral home and the nurse that worked at the Army Air Base there. So I guess I wanted to get started. Okay, so picture this: 1947. You have Glen Dennis, who's a mortician for Ballot Funeral Home. I don't know if it was called Ballot Funeral Home back then. I know it was bought out because Glen Dennis talks about it on his on YouTube. You can actually go to U.S. National Archives on YouTube and watch him be interviewed and talk about this. But I do know he mentioned Ballot Funeral Home, and at the time when he worked there, it was bought out, so he ended up leaving. So anyway, I'll put the link on the bottom where you guys can go look at it if you guys haven't already looked at it. So anyway, 1947, this crashed in the desert on Mac Brazel's ranch, and I think it's out there for like almost a week. I believe it was out there a week before he went out there to collect the piece. Anyway, you guys know about the story. We're not going to get into all that. My thing is to focus on Glen Dennis and the nurse that he said that worked at the Army Air Base and who saw these alien beings brought in. I guess I just wanted to know, did anyone ever find... I know the nurse name was Matilda. Oh, let me see if I can pull it up. Hold on. Matilda O'Donnell McElroy, and she was an Army nurse that worked at the base at the time, and she was a good friend of Glen Dennis. So I know when the object or whatever was crashed, it was brought to the military base there, which was the Army military base there, and Glen Dennis was contacted from someone by the Army, and he was asked about caskets small enough to fit a child, something about 4 foot, something small enough to fit something 4 feet, and he told him we can order them for you, especially order them for you. And I think they asked about how many they needed. I think they said about 3 or 4. I don't know. You have to go back and watch this story. I don't want to give you false information, but I do know he was contacted from the military base about small caskets for the size of someone about 4 feet. Anyway, he ended up getting called to the military base. I believe he ended up bringing someone to the military base that was hurt or got hurt in the crash, or was out there searching or picking up debris. Something happened to one of the soldiers. He ended up bringing the person to the Army Airfield Hospital, whatever it was, to get treatment, whatever. Because I guess the funeral home used to help out with soldiers that got injured and stuff at the time and all that kind of stuff, and transporting them to the Army Airfield Hospital, because I guess maybe they had an ambulance. You know, Roswell was tiny back then, so the funeral home, I think, did a lot of things. So when he got there, he said there was all this chaos. He saw like this bluish metal being brought in on trucks and whatever. He said like it had a bluish tint and like it had almost been heated or whatever. And while he was there, he ran into his nurse friend, and she asked him, "What are you doing here?" She was all upset. She was like, "You shouldn't be here. You're gonna get in trouble for being here. You need to leave, and I'll talk to you later." And so anyway, we're gonna skip all the in between about him being addressed by the sergeants there, and they questioned him and asked him what he was doing there. He said he saw a crash. We're gonna bypass that. You guys can watch that because that's a whole long story. Anyway, so the nurse ended up contacting him, and I think the next day she was like, "I know you've been worried about me. So much was going on." Anyway, they met at a diner, I believe, the next day or a couple of days later, and she said, "You won't believe what happened." And she just said, I don't believe it myself. And he said that you could tell she was pale and panicking, and she just didn't look well. He asked her what was going on and everything, and she was like, there was these I guess supposedly alien bodies that were brought in, and the alien bodies were brought in. She said two of them were dead on site. One, and they was dismembered really bad. One, like it may have lived when the ship crashed and walked out, but it ended up dying later. Anyway, she was brought in. The doctors, she walked into that's the hospital, whatever, and the doctors told her, we need you, come in here and help us. And then she walked in and she saw these alien bodies laying on this slab table, and she just couldn't believe it. And she said that she got almost so sick to the stomach, she just could not believe it. They were like I believe he said the skin was like almost a translucent color, maybe like a translucent gray. At least that's what the nurse told him. And they had only like 4 fingers that were really slender and long, with like these little suction pads on the end of each finger. And she said the smell was horrific. It was so awful that they had to leave the room every few minutes to work on these bodies and do the autopsies, and come back and work on the bodies and do the autopsies and come back, because they were getting so sick. Not only was getting sick from the smell, or if like fumes were coming from the bodies making them sick. He didn't really clear on that part. But anyway, I guess supposedly the story goes that the ship crashed. They didn't know where it came from, but they knew it wasn't human, whatever. And so supposedly the story goes, she was so upset. She told him everything of what happened and gave a description of the body and drew it down on a notepad or whatever. And so then they went their separate ways. And then he reached out to her the next day. And the next day, ironically, weirdly enough, she wasn't at the base anymore. Suppose she got transferred out overseas. And that's really suspicious. I don't know if she got transferred out overseas because of what she saw and what she was so upset, and the army was worried about her talking. It's possibly, but conveniently and weirdly enough, she got transferred and sent overseas. And I think he ended up mailing her a letter, and the letter got returned. It said, I think it said deceased or whatever. And suppose she had got killed in a training mission with some other nurses when she was sent overseas. I believe it was England or London. I could be wrong, but like I said, watch the video because I don't want to give you guys all wrong information. But I guess my main question is, did anyone ever find this nurse? I mean, I've listened to Glen Dennis on YouTube talk about this incident, this story, many times, and the guy doesn't look like he's BSing us. I mean, most of the time you could tell when people are lying or get a sense of them lying, but his story seems legit. I just don't. I've analyzed that video. I've looked at that video a bunch of times. I'm pretty sure more than 10 times, more than 15 probably. And he just doesn't seem to be BSing us. And there was another video I saw him talk on it too, and his story was consistent. He didn't change the story. He talked about the nurse, how she looked sick, and she talked about the long spindly arms of these beings, how this part of the arm was way longer than the rest. It just looked weird, she said, and the heads were a little bit larger than our heads, and they didn't have any hair or whatever. And his story was consistent. He didn't change. And I just want to know if anybody ever because you don't hear about anybody ever locating or finding this nurse, which is strange. I mean, I guess it's possible if she was sent overseas and she was killed in a training accident. But then you have to ask yourself, was it an accident or did the government take her out or murder her because they were worried about what she was gonna say? Because she was freaking out really bad. Glen Dennis. Unfortunately, he's no longer alive. I think he passed away a couple of years ago, so you can't really talk to him. Well, but it would have been good if somebody could have questioned this nurse. It had to be. There were other soldiers and sergeants there. What about the doctors? I wonder who are the doctors that worked on these beings? Because I personally believe that something did crash, that there was non-human. The other thing I wanted to ask about was this. The Army had this craft for over a week before they made the statement that they said. Let me turn my radio down on my phone. I'm sorry about that. So the Army had this craft for over a week before they came out with the statement and said the Army has captured a flying saucer, blah, blah, blah. Then the next day they retracted it. If they had already known they weren't going to, who authorized first of all, who authorized to release that statement that the Army had a flying saucer? I mean, because they had to have known after they've had this thing for a week that they didn't want the public to know. So who took it upon themselves to announce it that the Army had this craft? Then they decided to retract the story. And for a decade, no one followed up on the story till Stan Friedman got involved when he met Jesse Marcel, I think, in New Orleans, and they got to talking, and they told him the story or whatever. So we definitely know something crashed there. But I wish we knew more about the nurse. If she didn't die and it was just, and maybe the Army threatened her and sent her overseas to keep her quiet, or maybe they actually did. I just wish we knew more about what happened to her. If any of you guys know more about the story, let me know, because I definitely want to know. It's a very fascinating, interesting case. Even though it's been 70 plus years, the Roswell story still fascinates me. Because like I said, I definitely believe something crashed there. I mean, they took Mac Brazel, the rancher, and held him. They pretty much held him against his will to keep him, or to convince him to change his mind about what he thought or whatever, because he completely changed his whole story. He went along with what the Army told him, because they pretty much threatened him. But yeah, I guess that's just, what the other thing was interesting that Glen Dennis said, which makes me think his story is legit, that he said there was when he was at the Army base, he was approached by a black sergeant. Now, this was in 1947. I thought the Army was still segregated. I thought they didn't become desegregated until 1949, but I was talking to Richard Dolan, because I'm part of his members. He said the Army was desegregated in 1948. So it's interesting to see that there was a black sergeant that approached him, that questioned him to find out what he was doing there. The black sergeant called another sergeant, and supposedly they were not nice to him, to Glen Dennis, which is surprising, because they were really pissed that he was there. But yeah, if you guys know more about the nurse or whatever, and give me your thoughts, let me know. Like I said, I will put a link down below where you can go and see the interview with Glen Dennis, the mortician that worked at the funeral home that assisted the Army base in Roswell in 1947. So yeah, that's all I got. Thanks for tuning in to my channel. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Hopefully I will post something else soon. Bye. I'm out. Okay, if my thing stops recording. Maybe I'm not out. My